Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the radical preacher Anjem Choudary has been sentenced to 5.5 years in jail for inciting support for Islamic State militants. A judge at the Old Bailey said he and his accomplice, Mohammed Mazhar Rahman, had shown contempt for the values of democracy in their support and encouragement of IS. Tonight, the Home Secretary says the country is now a bit safer. Our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel, was in court.
An Islamic State stretching from China into the Middle East.
After more than 20 years on the streets of Britain, Anjem Choudary is behind bars. The maximum sentence was 10 years for inviting support for ISIS. The radical preacher got 5.5.
That is the Islamic solution.
The judge, Mr. Justice Holroyd, told Anjem Choudary that he was a dangerous, calculating influence whose words were like gold on Twitter. You, he said, indirectly encouraged violent terrorist activity. But the combined efforts of the intelligence services and the police could never definitively link the former lawyer to even one terrorist incident at home or abroad. This was Anjem Choudary in Norway 4 years ago, surrounded by members of an al-Mujahideen-style group called the Prophet's Ummah. Many in the lineup have gone to Syria. Among them, Reza, on the far left, is an alleged ISIS executioner. Omar Chabail, just to the left of Choudary, was killed in Mosul last year. And to the right, Danish jihadi Abu Musa, also killed in Syria, and the same with Norwegians Hisham Ahmed and Egson Avdaili.
What's interesting about it is that many of the people there, half the people in the photo either went to Syria, been killed in Syria, but you know, they were the kind of leaders of all these different organisations, and I think it reflects his importance across Europe.
Islam is the fastest growing ideology and religion in the world today.
Chowdhury's relentless publicity drive drew the crowds, but made it easier to monitor, easier to gather intelligence, easier to target. Now he's gone. His acolytes are disappearing from the streets. Instead, his conviction simply moves his recruiting grounds to prisons, where many of his followers have done or are doing time. Former cage fighter Usman Raja has come across many of them. His role is to unpick the elements of their extremism, in other words, to de-radicalise.
With all of this, it's a case of you're there for as long as it takes, because this isn't a quick fix.
He says his successors include Abu Mansha, convicted of plotting to kill a British soldier, Andrew Rowe, a convert jailed for planning attacks, and Jordan Horner, found guilty of enforcing extremist values on the streets of London. What is the antidote to Anjem Choudhary's poison, then?
The antidote to the phenomenon is that we need to get a correct understanding out there, because the issue is that there's an identity, a faith identity that's been hijacked.
The sentencing of Anjem Choudary has triggered a new prison's anti-radicalisation strategy of isolation. It's very likely that he will be located on wings occupied by lifers and those who spent years behind bars, and where his message will fall on deaf ears.
The country is a bit safer. All the evil that they have been sowing, all their evil words and the dissent they've tried to sow throughout society is over. They are paying the price and they are going to jail.
But the self-declared Islamist scholar could be out in just 2 years. He will then be under a 15-year notification period where the authorities can impose controls like bans on protests, meetings and speeches online. 9 of Choudhary's supporters chanted Allah Akbar as they watched their leader leave the dock. His imprisonment may end one threat of radicalisation, but the internet now poses so many more.
Well, Anjem Choudary has been the face of radical jihadi propaganda in this country for 15 years. But has the danger moved elsewhere? For example, the internet. And is the government's Prevent programme, intended to counter radicalisation, working? Well, joining us from Birmingham is Jahan Mahmood, who was an advisor to Prevent under the coalition government. And with me here in the studio is Sarah Khan, who's co-founder of Inspire, set up to counter extremism and gender inequality. Sarah Khan, let me start with you, because if Prevent had worked properly, Anjem Choudary and his followers wouldn't have got half as far as they did, would they?
Well, I think it's very important to acknowledge all the positive work that Prevent is doing, and we don't often have that discussion and debate. We know, for example, that Anjem Choudary just stood on, it was literally dancing on the law, on the line of the law. But I think let's look at Prevent, let's see what it's done. The government has said that around 120 people have been stopped from travelling to Syria, including 50 Muslim children. We know that Prevent has taken down 58,000 pieces of illegal material. It has worked in partnership with Muslim civil society groups across the country, many of them producing counter-narrative videos online on the internet, which have had over 15 million views. So that's important work that needs to continue to happen.
Is the problem, in your view, that Prevent isn't getting the support from the community that, in your view, it deserves?
Well, I think there is a lot of support that's happening. I mean, I know numerous local Muslim organisations. We know that Prevent has engaged with around 370 mosques in the last year. It's engaged with around 385 community organisations. So that engagement is happening. Those projects are being delivered. But, of course, there's always more that needs to be done.
Well, let me put that to Jahan Mahmood. The Prevent system is a force for good, in Sarah's view. Do you agree?
Well, let me ask her this question then. Why have 800 people travelled to Syria if it's working? Its outreach has clearly not worked. We clearly have an issue. The online counter-narrative doesn't come anywhere near the propaganda videos that are out there. And this is something a number of advisors have been saying for a number of years. I mean, I was one of them who said that back in 2010. Since then, it's just amplified and got a lot worse. The government took its eye off the real issue, and I'm afraid Prevent has lost its credibility in the Muslim community, for which reason its outreach programme hasn't worked too well.
Prevent has lost its credibility. Well, that's damning, isn't it?
I would disagree with that. And I think we need to have a fair and honest discussion. There are many groups, including in Birmingham, that Jahan is probably familiar with, like Kick It, for example, who've come out and said they do excellent work with mosques, working with vulnerable individuals who have substance abuse, alcohol abuse, who've been tempted to become radicalised and join Syria, who the government has supported. And groups like that have openly said, we welcome working with the local Prevent coordinator, and by not having that support, we wouldn't be doing what we are doing today.
But hasn't it become toxic now, and therefore needs to be done?
I think, Kathy, what we are not having a discussion about in this country is how has Prevent become toxic. And I've written about this in great depth in my book, which is out yesterday, called The Battle for British Islam, which looks at how Islamist organisations in this country have gone up and down the country, deliberately peddling lies and myths about Prevent. So, for example, saying things like, if you grow a beard or wear a headscarf, you will be referred to Prevent. These are absolutely false lies and myths. And all that does is actually weaken Muslim parents' support of Prevent when they can see that their children are being radicalised. It is irresponsible and dangerous.
Jahan Mahmood, I mean, those are strong words. Lies and myths about Prevent are being peddled by the community, according to Sarah.
Well, if that's the case, then why is it that a number of teachers have rang me up and said that the training was very poor? Why is it that even imams have actually called me and said that they don't fare any better after the rap video, which I actually featured in for the government in 2010? So clearly it can't all be lying, and it can't all be a myth, especially the fact that we have individuals who now, because of Prevent, feel isolated, and unfortunately are looking for a sense of belonging elsewhere because they feel discriminated against. What I would like to see, and I hope that is in Sarah Khan's book, that she criticises British foreign policy, which she hasn't really done over the years that I've watched her over TV and listened to some of her debates, to hold the media to account for giving people like Anjem Choudary an opportunity to speak on a national platform. This is a soapbox preacher who ended up being a national hate preacher, so the media should also be held to account. I know that Channel 4 interviewed him a number of times. Why give an individual like that the space and the time to help recruit individuals into his cause? And just one extra point, in 2014 I was on a BBC interview where they played a recruitment video by ISIS, and central to that was a young man called Nasser al-Muthana, I believe it was. Now, why play a recruitment video? What do recruitment videos do? They recruit, and then we're bashing on Muslims, saying, well, you never do enough. I'm afraid this is a lot bigger than the Muslim community.
Okay, let me put that to Sarah. The media has a responsibility, and the government needs to admit that Western policy has
we know that there's never
this.
been a single cause for each individual who becomes radicalised. There's a wide range of issues. But I can tell you with some of the cases that I've worked with, girls as young as 13 who've tried to leave the country to join ISIS, who have absolutely no understanding of geo-complex politics in the Middle East, who don't even understand who Saddam Hussein was or Iraq. But they've been radicalised by the kind of same Islamist ideology that Anjem Choudary preaches. And just on a final point, in your package before, you had someone talking about the issue of identity, and identity is crucial. In 2006, Anjem Choudary plastered, when he was part of the banned organisation Al-Ghuraba, he plastered bright rectangular yellow stickers across lampposts in East London saying, British values versus Islamic values. This is the point about identity. They are trying to confuse young people about identity, and we have to promote the idea of a British Islam and a reconciled British Muslim identity.
Sarah Khan, Jahan Mahmood, thank you very much for joining us.
I've been getting away with it all my